all of these must take a back seat to pragmatism. And therefore you must worry about how the world is doing things. Testing on cells, all of this has to be done. Invention versus discovery. You must understand what the words invention and discovery really are. Today there is one word which nobody seems to understand. That is the word innovation. The government has even declared that they will make innovation universities. Now, innovation is not something that can be legislated. Invention cannot be legislated. Discovery also cannot be legislated. It just happens. If you leave everybody alone, they may invent, discover, and innovate. But innovation could be something like a retail store, for instance. Reliance is a great innovator. It is when it makes a big store with lots of things inside it. Discovery, of course, all of you will remember penicillin. But the Supreme Court was worried about this. This is Mr. Gopal Subramaniam, who was nominated to the Supreme Court and whose nomination the government actually turned down. Very prominent lawyer. He argued on behalf of the company in this case. He submitted that by definition, a trifling change in the verbal section, mere discovery of a new form of innovation, can never ordinarily meet the threshold of novelty, etc. And he said an invention cannot be characterized by the word mere. The word invention is distinct from the word discovery. So this is what the Supreme Court said. This is what Mr. Subramaniam said in arguing for the plaintiff. So Supreme Court decided invention is different from the word discovery. Now, of course, I will use the word discovery. If you wanted to say what is discovery? Discovery is like what Fleming did. He discovered penicillin. He actually didn't know he discovered penicillin, but he actually discovered a substance which magically cleared bacterial colonies on a plate after contamination. It was Florey and Chain who later discovered penicillin by working on the mold. Invention could be Edison's discovery of the light bulb. Edison could have discovered the electron. J.J. Thomson did. But Edison instead discovered the light bulb because he was interested in illumination. But you might also say relativity is also an invention. But it's an invention of the human mind. It may not help you in everyday work, but relativity is in some ways could be classified as an invention. Innovation, many, many ways. So that's Fleming, that's the mold, that's the molecule. Took a while to go from here to here, but today that's the basis of antibiotics. Where do you get antibiotics from? You get antibiotics from mostly from soil organisms. Microorganisms which are resident in the soil, you pull them out, grow them in laboratories, extract substances. Streptomycin was the first one to follow penicillin, which was the first line against tuberculosis for a very long time until drug-resistant tuberculosis came along. Others have come over the years, cholesterol-lowering agents and so on. But I really want to conclude by showing you how science sometimes works. When you say science and society, remember there have been societies which have been much more troubled than our society in recent times and have gone through very, very difficult periods. In China, during the years of the Cultural Revolution, the molecule artemisinin was discovered. This today is the drug which is used against drug-resistant malaria. Chloroquine, quinine was the first, chloroquine was the second. After the chloroquine-related antimalarials, the parasite began to develop resistance. The artemisinin was developed by the Chinese. Why did the Chinese want to develop artemisinin? This was because the Chinese were, at that time, in the 1960s, ready to intervene in the Indochina War, in the Vietnam War, where the United States was involved. At that time, the major cause of death was not due to the war itself, but malaria, which the soldiers were on both sides were getting, because fortunately mosquitoes don't distinguish between warring parties, and they are actually neutral in that sense. And everybody was dying of malaria in those jungles of Indochina. So the Chinese had a very strong reason to develop an anti-malaria. But what was that period in China? That was the period in China when Mao Zedong had decided, this was before the name was changed, he had decided the Cultural Revolution was to now revamp China altogether. And as part of the Cultural Revolution, what he did was he decided that scientists and engineers and all these people were useless people, and they all had to be sent out into the fields to work as farmers. So they were sent off as forced labor, and very few scientists were now retained in the laboratories which China at that time had. But when they were retained, they were asked to do only one problem. And the problem that they were given was to find an antimalarial. So what the Chinese then did, and they were led by the lady whose picture I showed there. This was a long time before people began to talk about gender equality and so forth. But Yu Tu was now, I think, I don't know whether she's still alive, but a couple of years ago she was in her late 80s. She was the leader of this team. And what they did was they extracted Chinese, from ancient Chinese literature, they had a lot of medicinal herbs against malaria. You will remember that quinine itself is a natural product. The Christian missionaries and the Jesuit priests in South America realized that if the tribals were chewing the bark of the cinchona tree, and then the fever was coming down. So there's a substance in the bark of the cinchona tree which gave us quinine. Today, from one of the Chinese plants, artemisinin was actually discovered. How was it discovered? What they did was they extracted thousands of extracts, I think 2,500 extracts of different plants, screened them. How did they screen them? They infected mice with malaria and shot the extracts into the mice and asked whether the malarial parasite was screened. Brutal experiment. One extract proved to be promising. They took that extract and that gave them artemisinin. But when they were doing that extract, they had a problem. The problem was a very simple scientific problem. The problem of reproducibility. Sometimes they extracted it, that decoction worked. At other times, the decoction did not work. So if it is irreproducible, it can't be used. How did this happen? They went back and read, and since I think one worry which I have is when you have a traditional name for a gathering. I very often nowadays am worried that the traditional name for the gathering does not actually look at tradition in its entirety, but only looks at some aspect or the other. Here, if you're doing from ancient Chinese medicine, the next step, of course, is to go back and read the original text, not to listen to the innumerable mistranslations which have been done, and not to listen to word of mouth of a number of charlatans who would have now developed over the decades. They went back and then they found that in 340 AD, this was a little bit of that plant was to be taken, and it says the translation is that emerges, that is to mix it with 2 liters of water, wring out the juice and drink it all. But what were they doing? In the previous slide, if I show you, what do chemists do? If they get a plant material, they put it in a flask, they'll pour a solvent, water, organic solvent, afterwards they'll boil it. This is why chemistry is often related to cooking, because you're always boiling something. And, but when they boiled it, if they boiled it too much, this molecule got lost. Many years later, the reason for it became apparent because it had that remarkable structure, and right there you see why chemistry is important. It was a peroxide. Now you know that hydrogen peroxide can be explosive. In fact, today, peroxides are used even in our space things for propellants and so forth. So this molecule actually has a little bit of an explosive locked inside its chemical structure, and then when you heat it too much, it goes away. The moment they realized it, all they had to do next was to make a decoction without going through the boiling step. They got artemisinin, and today, in the 21st century, artemisinin is the first line of defense against drug-resistant malaria, and we are still searching for some more. Now this is of course an example where everything has come together. The ancient literature, traditional knowledge, translated into modern science, but done under politically very, very difficult conditions where society was in fact in a very turbulent stage in China. So the only message that I want to leave you with is that when you think of science and society, remember that science doesn't stand alone. It is in fact embedded in a much more complicated socio-political, economic context. And therefore one must think of research, science and technology and its contributions to society in a somewhat more enlightened way than we have been doing in the recent past. Thank you very much.
If anyone has any questions for Professor Balram, please raise your hand.
You can ask me anything. I can answer. I'm a professor, so I have no problem in saying I don't know.
Sir, from what I have heard,
Use the mic, please.
from what I have heard, most of the daily things we use, even the maybe medicines and the soaps we use, are all manufactured by MNCs. They are not fit for human use, sir, which is banned in most of European countries. Lifebuoy is considered not fit for human; it's only for uses for dogs, sir. So how far it is good for us to use in India? Because all the MNCs are dumping the byproducts to us, sir. So how far it is good for us?
Well, this is a question which you have to see. Suppose MNCs dump byproducts. We have such a large establishment, regulatory establishment in India, that it should be very easy for them to find out when they are dumping a byproduct and when they are giving you the real thing. It turns out certainly for pharmaceuticals and for most things, what you say is not correct. The MNCs may make more money than they should. That's a different matter. But very often the regulatory process in India approves something only after the regulatory process in the United States has approved it. So most things come earlier in use in US or in Europe than they do in India. But we don't have a very robust regulatory mechanism. The problem of dumping, adulteration of drugs and all is more of a local problem. Dumping drugs may come from other developing countries. Like for example, China can dump drugs in India, India can dump drugs in Africa and so forth. That's a different matter. So you must remember MNCs today, Indian companies are also MNCs. Maybe not in the pharmaceutical sector, but pharmaceutical sector almost completely MNCs. Most Indian companies are going out of business and they're being bought up. But in many other sectors, our companies are also MNCs. When you go to Africa, you're an MNC.
Sir, but since they are considered as so slow poison, we should also ban now, sir.
No, this business of poison, see, if you don't want to take the medicine, don't take it. Most pharmaceuticals appear to help patients. They may not help all patients equally, but when it becomes a matter of life or death, you can't have a regulatory process which denies the treatment to an individual. Here the discussion is only on the costs of that. See, most drugs are toxic. As far as possible, you shouldn't take them. But if you fall ill, what do you do?
Sir, you mean to say that you're not talking about the ethical questions? You know, sir, we are China dumping medicines in the third world in the name of India, Indian companies. There are so many things.
Those are different questions. Those are questions like, for example, if China puts an
No, but
Indian
what should the society do? What should be the responsibility of the youth like this?
What should they do? One is, first of all, they should not believe everything that they read in the newspaper. They should go back and look a little bit at original sources which are readily available on the internet. There's no difficulty in reading them. Now, if you take the endosulfan controversy, for instance, in Kerala, the endosulfan controversy has two sides. And the papers of both the sides in the endosulfan controversy have been appearing in Current Science, which is a journal produced from Bangalore. Now they are scientific articles. I was editor for a long time. When I read both articles, I can see some element of justification in one, I can see some element of justification in the other. These need to be, but I can't completely understand it, but these need to be looked at by more specialists to see. And then after that, government should take a firm view. If you want to ban endosulfan, ban it. There's no problem. Because some of pesticides, the damage caused by banning them is not so profound. Whereas sometimes for life-saving drugs, the damage caused by banning them may affect individuals. See, there are also in this, when I say society can do very little. What one hopes in gatherings like this is, some of the people who call themselves society today will tomorrow be in positions where they are now governing the place. Tomorrow I'm sure there will be someone here wanting to go to the IAS examination, someone who prefers to go to the National Law School, someone else who decides to join the Aam Aadmi Party or the BJP or the Congress or one of those. Now, would it not be better if they then knew that they should now acquire for themselves some area of expertise in matters of society?
No, but still today we have a lot of IAS officers who are very intelligent, more intelligent, still not effective in.
Tell me, how many IAS officers who are very intelligent? They are very intelligent, I agree, I don't deny it. How many of them have the time or the facility to listen to, let us say, some professor trying to explain something?
They are
Now, for example, in this audience over here, there are lots of IAS officers in Bangalore. I've never encountered an IAS officer in any place where I have tried to give, let us say, some lecture on the public understanding of science. Never. Now, who comes? Young students. I'll give you another one. I'll give you an example of Bangalore itself since you're doing this and you're asking me this question. Bangalore Science Forum, which Professor Narasimhaiah started long, long ago. I have been a regular speaker in it for maybe 35 years or more. Never failed to go there whenever they called me. And there will be this hall, and the hall will consist of, there of course there are fewer young people. The first few rows will be consist of many people who, one more person accompanies them, so the hall is quite full. Because each person in the first few rows has to be brought in by one or two more other people, helping them to come, sit down. They are very keen, they ask good questions. They are the people who have retired in the Basavagudi area and who have settled down and who have there are a few young students. But most of the young students who are there are, I think, less interested in what is being discussed. There is, see, if society does not want to understand things, nobody can make society understand things. There can only be small groups of people who try. And then you hope that there will be a ripple when they migrate to other places. This is going to be a very long process. It's not, I'll be gone long before.
In continuation with the questions from the younger people, not yet being helped to be here. You have been on many syllabus committees and governing council, I'm sure, during your career, and there are many older professors who are on all these syllabus committees. And since you talked about higher education and forming, and I have seen young people all the time, I would like to put this in context with young people here. That whenever we try to teach something, the first question which is asked is how many marks is it worth in the examination? And to that, to the answer that question, which is a valid one. The syllabus, I think, may be a first step in the direction of enlightenment in all these areas.
Yes, I think well,
That
the point which Madam raises here is probably the single most important issue in education today, because it starts not in higher education but all the way through. But I'll begin by, in my own defense, only by saying one thing. I don't know, for whatever reason, I've never been on a syllabus. And I've never been on the syllabus committee, and wherever I've had the opportunity to give a talk like this, particularly the audiences which are interested more in chemistry and biology, I do, and even in the Indian Institute of Science, where I was the director for 9 years, I must say that even if you're the head of the institution, you have very, very limited influence on your faculty. They can be quite resistant to change and ideas. So one of the things which I've always felt is that we teach too much science in school, and as a consequence of this, children actually get put off science. They should learn less science, because some of the science that you learn is better appreciated at a slightly more advanced level. And you will be better off learning history and literature and all of these things at that stage, and have your textbooks reduced. Because I learned no science. I had only one general science thing in school. The textbook was only this much. Today the chemistry textbook of the CBSE is so thick that if, I don't know about students, but sometimes I think parents lift it to give it to their children. And if by chance it fell on their foot, they would be in danger of fracture. So you should not, and much of what they teach is again taught even at master's level. And the same thing is taught again. So even if they go on to do chemistry, they are turned off. The best way of not turning off students from a subject is to give them only small amounts. As a general school education, you don't need so much information, because when they come out of it, none of that information really stays there. 20 years ago, there was a strong argument against this, 20, 30 years ago. You know, everything is growing, people need to know more because otherwise they won't be able to keep up. But today with the internet, what we need to teach students, we need to teach students only how to learn. We don't need to teach them what they should be learning. If they learn how to learn with a few things, they may do better. But this would be very difficult to implement, because teaching also involves teachers. So the first problem is to teach the teachers. So it's a profound problem. So like for example, now the government has what is called the Pandit Madan Mohan Malaviya National Teachers Training Mission. And my own institution has now a small outfit in Chalakere, where one of my colleagues spends in the middle of nowhere in Chitradurga district, nothing in sight for miles around. He spends all his time there training 100 teachers at a time, 8th, 9th and 10th class teachers in mathematics, physics, chemistry, by actually doing experiments, so that the teachers, when they go to the class, will be able to teach the children more interesting things which the children might remember. But this is, I think, a very, very difficult problem that we face. The problem in India is that this is where I think society is very important. No education minister, state or center, is going to listen unless the people tell. But when they are addressing any gathering, if everybody sits silent and bouquets of flowers are given and garlands are given and the matter ends, then of course they don't get any feedback. Then whenever anybody else says anything to the contrary, the only thing that happens is that they don't call that person again a second time. So I think society needs to be also aware of how governance is done.
Sir, in extension of your point, for example, I am an electronics student and I've been studying one topic in first PU, second PU, and now I just completed my 6th semester where I had the same questions which I had studied in my first PU. So in extension of that point, sir, like there are school students, 8th, 9th and 10th, and they have developed that kind of mindset that, science is, more to achieve, it's driven by greed. Or what I can say is, in simple words, an 8th standard guy is saying that the reason why I'm studying science is to have a car and a very good, beautiful wife. That is what an 8th standard student said. So again, it's a question of mindset.
I don't think the beauty of one's wife has anything to do with what he studied. Certainly not. Well, actually, unfortunately, Mr. Narayan Murthy here conducts annually a thing which appears on NDTV on how to make science more popular among students. Because they believe that science is not popular among students. There once when I was participating in a panel, one student asked from Andhra Pradesh, said that if I study science, I won't even get married. And so my counter question to him was, how many scientists have you seen who are not married? And this is not, I don't think so. Science is one thing which I would disagree with you. Science is not driven by greed, no. Many other professions are driven by greed. Today you can't make much money by being a scientist. You get a reasonable salary, you'll be comfortable. You certainly have a TV, you'll certainly have a car, you can have a place to stay and all of that, but you won't be super rich. Today if I wanted to be greedy, I would be a lawyer. And if I knew a little bit of science, then I would go for a course in law, because there are more court cases which are now happening in these areas. I would become a politician. I would become a building contractor. I would take a civil engineering degree basically, and then afterwards move away and so on. But I don't think greed is an issue here. Neither greed nor wives are or the issue. Science is not very popular. In school, people take science only because that's the way to go to engineering or medicine. Now, that is only because those courses appear to be ones where people are more employable. But that doesn't matter. That's actually good. See, I would count engineers and doctors as scientists. I don't distinguish when I say science between science, engineering and medicine. They're all basically science.
Come to my question. First point I wanted to tell all the people is to think to themselves, ask this question. How educated is the education minister? Now what I'm realizing when I see when they teach, they are misinterpreting the word science. Science is more treated as a subject now, rather it should be taken as a way of life. And then, I mean, that's what my impression, what I feel. But then the question is, should I take up science because I have the taste for it, or should I listen to my tummy?
No, when a student is deciding on what subject to take, the correct advice to the student would always be, you take what you like. Okay. Never should you do something which somebody else tells you to do if you don't like it. But many times, the major problem with students is not what they like. They don't know what they like. They take some time before you decide what you like. But today, for instance, I know that parental pressure on students would be to take a course which will assure employment. And that course could either be engineering, it could be commerce, or it could be something else. But this sometimes doesn't preclude the person from changing afterwards. See, today many engineers afterwards have transformed themselves into scientists. My own institution, so many of them are now professors of science. Somewhere in the 30 years back, they would have got a degree in which was called engineering. And younger fellows now are all doing this. Today there's more connection between engineering and medicine than there ever was before. There's connection between science and law. But my point in this talk really is this. Suppose you say, look, I don't want all of this. I want to do Kannada. I'm going to write poetry. That's fine. Do it. But it doesn't hurt you to know a little bit about, because tomorrow they might nominate you to the Rajya Sabha. I hope they do.
India is said to be a developing country from past, I think, 100 years. So, what is the point in speaking about education or science when people are not having food to eat, place to live, and they don't know what to do? What is the point in living a good life? And what is the point in speaking a good education and schools, uniforms, books, and all?
One of the things that the two sectors, although many of these things are not considered very important, education in its broadest sense needs to be provided to the maximum number of people. Certainly in a country like India, you have a pyramid, whether it is education or whether it is wealth. So we very often see only the top of that pyramid, we don't see the base. But a country like India will develop only when the base is raised. One thing which is very important to recognize is raising the base does not mean cutting the top. No. All things must be done. What the computer people will now say, there must be parallel processing on all these fronts. That is, the focus on primary education is not at the expense of the focus on higher education. No. Question one might ask is how much money is to be allocated to each sector of the economy. None of you argues when the maximum allocation is done for defense. So it is actually a question of allocation, economics and governance. One doesn't benefit India by abolishing research, science, everything, and saying that we must put that money into, the amount of money spent is not that much. Recently, for example, you will see that two sectors have received cuts. One is health and the other is education. Now, the general argument against this being now made by many people, even if you don't agree with those people normally, you may have to agree with them on this particular issue, that an uneducated and unhealthy population is not likely to contribute to the cause of development. So these are two very important things. Now the infrastructure sector is also important, no one denies that. But it becomes a complex question of balancing. And so that's a very difficult job. Running India, and you have to have respect for the people who are running it, is hugely difficult. There is no more complex country to run than
So you're talking about the population and people starving of food. Let me tell you here, India has the highest storage of food grains in the whole world. It will suffice 1.5 billion, though we have 1.25 billion population. The problem here is we do not have the efficient transportation, or we do not have mechanisms where it properly reaches, and we also have populist schemes where some people are trying to gain out of this issue. We are capable of building nuclear power reactors where no radiation come out of the reactor, but we have failed to build the granaries to store the food grains. There is a greater politics involved in it, and despite our low productivity in agriculture, India has the highest storage of food grains. It meets the requirement of 1.5 billion. There is also another lobby which always feels only genetically modified food or genetically modified technology would only meet the requirement of food demand of the country. There is a greater politics in it, and definitely country can provide food for all.
Genetically modified food items are not so good for
No, in fact, I wanted to make a slide of that and bring now, for instance, if you have a discussion on society's appreciation for science, the genetically modified food debate is an even more complicated debate, because there will be a lot of scientists also who are on the other side. That is, you will find scientists and people technically in the field on both sides of the debate. Same problem you will have with atomic energy. There will be scientists on both sides of the debate. But some things, what I showed to you, most scientists will be on one side of the debate.
Thank you very much. We'll end the session here. If Balram sir permits, you can meet him outside and